Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. This is J.R. Moore coming to you live from deep in the mountains of the Missouri Ozarks on Wednesday, the 8th day of August, year of our Lord 2012. Welcome to the John Moore Show. Well, it's 62 degrees on the way to a high 95 to 100 degrees here deep in the mountains of the Missouri Ozarks. The drought and heat continues. A little bit of rain we had was very welcome, but not enough to do anything about ending the drought. Got some articles here at headlines at standadeo.com. And we continue, myself, Mike Harris, and several other men continue to network with each other, our private intelligence network, to learn the facts, separate fact from fiction when it comes to what's going on with these military operations and what appears to be evacuations of these bases near sea level. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is only about 250 feet above sea level, even though it's 80 or 90 miles from the ocean. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, the Marine Corps base at Camp Lejeune. Camp Pendleton, California, the Marine Corps base there. And Norfolk, Virginia, naval base, which is, if it's not the largest naval base in the world, it has to be one of the two or three largest. It may be the largest. So we're engaged in that basically every day of the week. I know myself, and I took the Sunday off. Mike Harris is recovering from a little bout of the flu, and he's feeling better and doing okay. But we continue to talk to our sources and attempt to get good, hard intel that we can bring to the table here and present to all you folks. We do have some Earth Change headlines at standadeo.com, and let's just get in here and see what we can get done before the first break. Going across Pacific Ocean to New Zealand, ash cloud over New Zealand as giant volcano erupts for the first time in 115 years. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. It is Wednesday, the 8th of August. And getting back to Earth Change headlines at standadeo.com, still in New Zealand, more risk to visitors after White Island erupts. Going across the Atlantic Ocean to Scotland and England, torrential rain devastates parts of Scotland and England. Coming back to, well, we're kind of all over the planet in this next report here. Worldwide volcanic activity. Tongariro, Etna, Stromboli, Popocatépetl, volcanoes in Colombia and Guatemala, Colombia, and Ecuador. And, of course, most volcanoes are under the ocean. We don't think of that very much, but they are. Going south to Arkansas, small earthquake strikes Arkansas. Drought damage looks to be the cause of the quakes. And then we have, going out to California, how one major Southern California earthquake could become two. Then we've got to the central part of the country here, most of the country. Dead crops, extreme drought, and endless wildfires are the new normal in America. I've been saying that, and this, I don't know who the author is, I haven't read the article, but hopefully that's not going to be the case, but it very well could be since the Gulf Stream has stopped. Next headline, the mighty Mississippi to run dry, ? Going over to the Philippines. Flooding brings chaos to Philippine capital. That would, of course, would be Manila. I was in Manila 4 or 5 years ago. Reminds me a lot of Vietnam. Massive San Francisco Bay Refinery fire spews health hazards. Then we've got world on alert for massive solar storm. Well, that confirms what I got from my DHS insider, that they're very concerned about a Carrington event taking place in the next 6 months. And then last but not least, where are we in this solar cycle? ? There's been a lot of discussion, emails, phone calls, talk on other radio shows about what Mike and Harris and I did a few weeks ago, talking about these dates, August 17th and September 26th. I've just incorporated those dates into everything I'm doing. I'm looking at them as motivators, especially that first one, motivating me to get things done that I've been procrastinating. And I have to emphasize, I have not asked my daughter, who lives in Seattle, to load up all the family and come down here to be safe in the Ozarks. I have not done that. Now, I might do that if I get information that I think is something I can rely on and stand behind it to the point where I'm ready to disrupt my beautiful daughter's life and the life of her family, her husband, her 3 children. I won't do that until I'm very, very certain that we're near enough to this that there's no choice. Obviously, I'm not convinced of that yet, and that's why I have not asked my daughter to get plane tickets to come down here. So that's what John Moore is doing. What you do is your choice. I have people contacting me by telephone and email who are anguishing over these dates. There's no way to live. It is no way to live. The way to live is to do what the Navy veterans have done. Now, whether something happens on August 17th or not is not the issue. The issue is there will be something happening. I can't say when. And it will be of a worldwide nature. And it will flood all coastal areas of all continents. And islands being wiped out, of course, many islands. That's a done deal. That will happen. And I'm relying on the scientists in the U.S. Navy and the fact that I've debriefed more than 24 Navy veterans who were at the classified briefings, advising them of this fact. It's not speculation, it's fact. The fact that during their lifetimes, these oceans will come out of their basins, flooding all coastal areas. These men were advised that when they retire, they may want to consider moving to one of the known safe havens, one of them being the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks. The Navy was mentioning the Wyoming-Montana border area as a safe haven. I don't necessarily agree with that, given the proximity of Yellowstone supervolcano. That aside, how do you want to live your life? Do you want to live a life of fear and anguish, worrying over a date or worrying what will come in the future, knowing that it's coming? If you watch my DVD, Global Warming, What the Government Isn't Telling You, you got a good heads up and a good education in that nearly 4 hours. If you start reading the thousands of pages I recommend that you read, you'll really be educated. That 4-hour DVD is a very compact, condensed version of what you need to learn. Very compact and condensed. If you can read less than 5,000 or 6,000 pages on this topic and consider yourself educated, well, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. There's a lot to know about this. A lot of science to know, a lot of history to know, a lot of archaeology to know. Americans, it's the nature of our culture, is we want to be completely informed in a 3 to 5 minute soundbite. In 60 minutes, they do 4 segments in an hour, minus the commercials. What's that? 11, 12 minutes each? People think they're being educated in those little segments of 10 or 12 minutes, whatever they are. Hardly. Hardly. This is a very complex, scientific, historical, archaeological, biblical matter. Understanding what's coming at us. What's 36 times 4? Well over 100. That's how many generations have lived and died since this happened the last time. 3,600 years ago. Average of 4 generations per century. Let's get an exact number here. 36 times 4. 144 generations of human beings living on this planet since this happened the last time. There's a collective amnesia. I believe Immanuel Velikovsky coined that term, collective amnesia of humankind. This knowledge has been preserved through written and oral histories. You probably heard, well, if you were listening a few months ago, Lucas and I talking about the Dogon people in Central Africa, North Central Africa, the Dogon people who have a oral history of what happened 3,600 years ago, and maps showing our solar system with things in it like Pluto Pluto wasn't known to modern science until, what, 80, 90 years ago? And these primitive, barefoot peasants in North Central Africa knew about it all these years, all these many centuries. I frequently talk with mainstream media people, and you can bet one thing: they're going to want a 30-second soundbite to explain something incredibly complex. That's their expectation. A friend of mine, he runs the Christian newspaper, owns and runs it. He's the main, and he edits it, and he's one of their writers also. He wanted me to do that with this topic. In 90 words or less, explain something this complex. Well, you're not going to get off that easy, ladies and gentlemen. You're not going to get off that easy. And you would be not very well advised to make major life decisions based on half or 1/3 or maybe 5 or 10% of the information. That would not be a wise thing to do. The wise thing to do is to educate yourself thoroughly and completely. I can't tell you, and you've probably seen it yourself, how many times people with no particular medical training, they or someone they care about gets a serious medical condition, and they study up. I mean, they study up on whatever it might be, a particular form of cancer or heart condition or whatever, diabetes, and they educate themselves to the point where they understand the language, they understand the terminology, they understand all the symptoms and learn about the possible cures, what works and what doesn't work, to the point where they can talk intelligently to a medical doctor, almost toe-to-toe. And these are just regular people, just regular plain old barefoot peasants like you and me that do this routinely. Well, that's what you need to do in this case as well. I know you're busy. You have a career, family obligations, social obligations, community obligations, hobbies that you want to participate in. There's nothing more important than this. Quite frankly, there isn't. I sometimes talk about the second most important story in 2,000 years being the fact, and it is a fact, scientifically provable fact, that the Gulf Stream stopped June 12, 2010. That's one of the many things. That's a consequence of this massive planetary-sized body moving into our solar system. There's been a dramatic increase in people who want to see this object. I went through that 12 years ago. In 2000, when I first learned about it, I was pretty focused on wanting to get to see this, to the point where I scheduled time at a private observatory. The place had it still has, I'm sure, a 30-inch telescope, 30-inch mirror telescope. Here's a break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. We're back. This is J.R. Moore. It is Wednesday, the 8th day of August. Going back to segue back to the solar storm situation. The Carrington event, 1859, just before the start of the Civil War, 1859, a solar flare that hit the Western Hemisphere. Now, we had no power grid then. Electricity was basically something in university experiments and not much else. But we did have an almost nationwide telegraph grid. Those telegraph wires acted as huge antennas picking up that energy and directing into the telegraph offices where it started fires. That was the Carrington event, 1859. The Department of Homeland Security, according to my inside source, the Department of Homeland Security is concerned there'll be another Carrington event, another Carrington-type event in the next 6 months. What would that do? Well, it would knock out the national power grid is what it would do if we happen to be the unlucky side of the planet. It'll hit half the planet, by the way. The unlucky side that happens to be facing the sun when this thing hits. Once the power grid goes down, it will be years to get it back up. Now, the power plants themselves could recover typically in 2 to 3 months. However, the substations, and this is what the engineers say. I'm no engineer. I read what the engineers say. The electrical engineers say that these substations, your neighborhood has one. Every neighborhood has a substation with these 8 and 10 foot tall transformers. Those transformers will be knocked out. They'll be damaged, not repairable. And they're no longer made in this country. Weekly production is 2 or 3 a week. There's a very small inventory of these transformers in the United States compared to the thousands that would be needed to get the power grid up and running again. The focus of government recovery would be, first of all, themselves, these centers of power, the state capitals, the nation's capital, military bases, and then, of course, critical infrastructure, water plants, sewage treatment plants, and so forth. By the time they get around to your neighborhood, it could be years with no electricity. Literally years. It would be a good thing to protect the equipment you have, radios, laptops, sensitive iPads, and things like that, your telephones. There would be a big push to get the phone grid up and running again, the cell phone service. Having your cell phone protected with one of the Faraday bags would be a really good idea. Be sure you put the charger in a Faraday bag also. That would be a good idea and help you recover quicker. And those are available at my website, and I'm so glad that I found those. I got motivated back when my daughter was born in 1974 to protect her from whatever may come. Up until then, as a healthy young male, I hadn't given it too much thought because I knew I could take care of myself. I could walk out the door with a pair of shoes and a knife and be okay. But when it came to my daughter's life, who was absolutely helpless as all infants are, I realized that I had to be more diligent in making preparations to protect her young, innocent life. That was the beginning of my preparedness quest 38 years ago. Within a few years, I did make it a quest, and I did get so involved that I realized by the summer of 1977 that I knew more about these matters than most people, and I went public doing my first paid survival consultation in the summer of 1977. St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper interviewed me about my endeavor, kind of tongue-in-cheek. If you read, I have copies of the article, basically making fun of John Moore and his preparedness consultations, survival consultations. But that's okay. The people who needed to know about it, they found out, and that was okay. So that was my first preparedness consultation, the summer of 1977. It's been very satisfying and gratifying to work with people over the years and help them get prepared. I've seen firsthand the consequences of what war does to people. For most of you listening to me, war is 2 hours in an air-conditioned room with a bag of popcorn. And war films can be quite realistic. The recent Clint Eastwood films are very realistic that he did about South Pacific warfare. Flags of Our Fathers, for example, or Saving Private Ryan. As realistic as they are, films don't bring the sense of smell. There's nothing like the smell of a dead Viet Cong with his head cut off. It's been lying in the tropical sun for about 3 days, floating down a canal with his hands tied behind his back after the body's been burned. You'll never forget that. Here's our break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. I sometimes tell people that I grew up in Vietnam. And when it comes to being transformed from a boy into a man, that is certainly what happened. I arrived in Vietnam 1 year and 3 months after graduating from high school, 1 year and 4 months after graduating from high school, the first week of September 1967. 20 years old, just had my 20th birthday a couple of weeks before. And I was quite naive. A 20-year-old young man, had 1 semester of college, just out of high school, coming from the Midwest. I was about as naive as naive could be in many ways. My father, of course, being a World War II veteran, I knew about his service to a certain extent and respected what he did. And the men of my generation, we were brought up in a culture of war. Ron Kovitz, he had his experience, and it was portrayed in the film Born on the 4th of July. Tom Cruise played him as a young Marine. If you watch Born on the 4th of July, you'll understand what men of my generation, how we grew up, being immersed in the culture of war as being the right thing and the proper thing to be part of and to believe in. The greatness and rightness of the United States and the wars that we'd fought in the past. That was our culture at the time. A steady diet of television. My generation is the first television generation. When I was a young man in St. Louis, a boy, there was 1 black and white TV station in St. Louis, Missouri, Channel 5. That grew to 2, which became 3. Eventually color came in sometime in the mid to late 1950s. Almost nobody had color TV. It was so outrageously expensive at the time. But these television stations were, they needed to fill up airtime, and they filled up a lot of airtime with World War II propaganda movies. And I watched every one of them. As many young men in my generation did, and young women too, of course. I watched every one of them multiple times. Sands of Iwo Jima, The High and the Mighty. I mean, it's just a long list of World War II propaganda movies. And that helped create the mindset of my generation. And by the time Vietnam rolled along, and us young men were 18, 19 years old, we may not have liked or wanted to go to war too much, but it seemed to be an inevitable foregone conclusion that going off to a war was almost a rite of passage. That to be accepted in society in the 1960s as a healthy 18 or 19-year-old, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that, young man, you're going to go to war. Doesn't matter whether you like it or don't like it, whether you support the cause or don't support the cause, you're going to go to war, and that's just the way it's going to be. There was no socially acceptable ways out of it at the time. We had men in their early to mid-20s, college students taking off for Canada. They were looked at as traitors, basically, by almost everybody, with very few exceptions. And we had the young men who got continuous deferments for college, and many of them grew up to be high-ranking politicians in the future. And then we had what I call patriotic draft dodging. People like George W. Bush, who successfully defended the southern border of Texas against all incoming Viet Cong as a jet fighter pilot. And not a single Viet Cong got past him on the Mexican border. Then we had people like, the senator from Massachusetts that ran for president. I'm blanking out on his name. But kind of ironic. Kerry, Senator Kerry, Senator John Kerry. John Kerry is a combat veteran of Vietnam. That's a fact. That is an absolute, provable, well-known fact. John Kerry, and I don't care for his politics at all, is a combat veteran of Vietnam, the U.S. Navy. He was in the Brownwater Navy. Incredibly dangerous. My dearest friend, he was my best man at my wedding. And we were in PSYOPs in Vietnam. He was assigned to a PSYOPs team that rode these brownwater boats down these narrow canals. The jungle came right up to the edge of the water. And the Viet Cong would frequently ambush these brownwater boats with heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. He had nightmares. We roomed together when we got back from Vietnam. He had nightmares for more than a year about what he went through. John Kerry went through that also. And during that election, when he ran against the patriotic draft dodger, George Bush, they made it look just the opposite. They made George Bush look like the war veteran, and John Kerry appeared to be the draft dodger. And they had this swift boat group, and egged on and promoted by the mass media to attempt to nullify the honorable service of Senator John Kerry in combat in Vietnam. How absurd. How absurd. It shows the strength and the power of the mass media that they can do such a thing. When you can take the combat veteran and compromise his honorable service and take the patriotic draft dodger, if he wasn't the son of the director of the CIA, there's no way he would have been a jet fighter pilot, by the way. That's one of the most difficult positions, if not the most difficult positions for anybody in the military to attain. You have to have very high IQ, be in supreme physical condition, and have all the necessary qualities to be the pilot of a high-performance jet fighter. What a joke. What an absolute joke. But that just shows the power of the mass media. Anyway, my generation, we went off to war. We all wanted to survive it. Many of us didn't. There's a black granite wall in Washington, D.C. on the Capitol Mall with, I believe, more than 55,000 names on it. Men and women who died in that needless, illegal, immoral war in Southeast Asia. About 2.5 million of us served over there. I'm reading a book right now where Vietnam vets play a large role, Enemies, Foreign and Domestic. I downloaded it on my Kindle, and it's a very well done novel. Most of us came back. We came back different. I don't care how old they were, how young. We had a lot of World War II vets in Vietnam, by the way. Many Korean vets. All our senior officers were either Korean vets or World War II vets. We had a B-17 tail gunner in my outfit. We even had a French Foreign Legion trooper, Specialist Philippe, in my unit, the 10th Psychological Operations Battalion in Can Tho, Republic of Vietnam. And he was stationed in the same town, in Can Tho, the 4th Corps headquarters, that he'd been stationed in with the French Foreign Legion 12 years before. And he knew the men and women who owned the shops and the restaurants and the bars, and he was a great guy to hang out with because he knew all the good places to go to have a great time. And he was quite a reader, and he was obviously had several languages that he knew. Great guy with a great perspective of that war, the Indochina War. I gained a lot of perspective working with these men and doing the research I did. Mostly classified documents from RAND Corporation, the CIA, military intelligence. and so forth. One of my jobs was to educate myself about the culture and the people so that we could hopefully convince them that they should support this South Vietnam, this Republic of Vietnam. It was a pretty hard thing to do because they had an inherent distrust of the central government in Saigon, as well they should have. An incredibly corrupt central government in Saigon. And everybody knew it. It was no secret. Run by Catholics. There was only one non-Catholic general in the entire South Vietnamese army. Only one. One Buddhist general. The majority of the population was Buddhist. The French came in there and they did the old colonial trick of creating if they didn't have a minority, they created a minority and put the minority in charge. The minority they created in this case were Buddhists converted to Catholicism, and they put them in charge of the country. And we got a caller here, Bob in Ohio. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, John. I was wondering if you were aware of the map created by the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory back in 1965.
No, I guess I'm not. What does it show? What's it about?
It's about they'd sent up satellites and mapped the altitude of the Earth, and they found out that there's 4 areas of the Earth where the water is stacked up 220 feet higher than if the Earth was completely spherical.
Okay.
And then there's 4 areas around the Earth where the water is lower by 253 feet.
Well, and that was 1965?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they've come a long way since then, and satellite imaging has become a lot more sophisticated. That was just the beginning of what we now know, but go ahead.
Yeah, anyhow, there's, from the distance, it would be 473 feet difference in the water. Apparently, the east and west coast of the United States is where the water is lower. And if you look at the maps, you can indicate how it created erosion patterns on the continents. If you take the high spots, it would indicate the directional flow of the water and where it would come in and flood these continent areas.
You can copy the map? You can email me, Bob?
Yeah, it's on cuttingedge.org.
Cuttingedge.org?
Yeah,
okay.
It's /news/N1621.cfm, but you probably should get it with cuttingedge.org. But it's basically 4 corners of the Earth map.
Okay. Well, since then, the oceanographers have found a bulge of water around the entire equator of the Earth, almost 500 feet above sea level. The imaging, satellite imaging in 1965 was quite primitive compared to now. But that was a good start, wasn't it?
Yeah, but what I'm looking at is if you can see the where the high spots are, and you know, you can, if like the Native Americans tracking animals, you can see the erosion patterns on the continents. And if you take in consideration the altitude levels of the areas on the continents, you can basically indicate the directional of the water flow and how it will come in and flood different areas.
Well, that's good knowledge. That's very helpful. You know, I'll definitely look that up. Anything else this morning, Bob?
That's basically it.
Okay, well, thank you for the call, sir. We appreciate it. Call-in number is 877-488-5350.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Bob. And we got Court in North Carolina. Good morning, Court.
Good morning, Mr. Moore. How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to, you know, I'm a recreational pilot. I'm a retired Marine, and I just wanted to extrapolate a little bit on.
We got a break. Hold that thought. We'll be right back up. All right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. We're back. Court and I have our backpacks off. We're ready to do some more radio here. Go ahead, Court.
Beautiful. wonderful. As I said before, I'm a recreational pilot, and you know, just taking in the whole spectrum of what's going on as in the geomagnetic world. You know, airports adjust their runways all the time, and it's been more so in the past 10, 12 years than it has been in the last 50, as far as I know. So you know, that's one
stop
indicator.
For it. People, I know what you're talking about, but let's explain for the benefit of our listeners. Those numbers on the end of the runways are not there for decoration. What do those numbers mean, and why do they change them?
Well, because the magnetic pole changes, and they actually change that for all incoming and outbound flights.
The numbers indicate the direction of the compass, don't they?
Correct.
In degrees. So if there's a 3-6 on the runway, that's 36 degrees.
Correct.
Right. And why are they changing those numbers?
Well, at local airports that I've been accustomed to flying in and out of, and a couple national airports, they've been adjusting those for about the past 8 years that I'm aware of, but hard in the past 3 years. And I'm wondering if that ties into.
Tell us why they're changing them, Court. You're getting ahead of yourself.
Because the magnetic north is changing drastically.
That's it. Thank you very much. You got it.
and I'm sorry. My other question is just if you extend, you know, some common sense, you know, talking about the national power grid and everything else. I realize that the government and the military is hardened for these kind of events and has planned for some time with that. Do you think that also covers spent nuclear power rods that are continuously cooled by water? I mean, has anybody even breached that subject?
Well, actually, spent rods, as long as they're separated from each other, they can't go critical. And that's typically, at least in this country, how they deal with that. They just keep them far enough apart that they can't build up heat among themselves. You pile them together, yeah, you could have a situation if the water goes away. And that's what's happening in Fukushima right now.
Right, and just thinking with a little bit of commonality, that you know, the common man like you and I, you know, they use water. They use water to obviously cool the rods, and even though they're spaced, when that water ceases to flow because of a power interruption for any length of time, that tends to create problems on its own.
Well, the water is inside the power plant. The water's there to be heated up. And make steam, of course. That's what you know. All these nuclear power plants are basically steam power plants, just like a nuclear submarine is a steamboat. But the spent rods generally aren't kept in cooling water. They're generally taken someplace where they can just be separated by distance and not need water to keep them cooled down.
Very good. Well, that explains that. Listen, keep doing what you're doing. It's a great show, and I hope everybody heeds advice. So thank you.
We appreciate it. The court will be our last call this morning. We don't have time to really effectively deal with another call. And preparedness is a matter of state of mind, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it comes down to. Your state of mind, your positive mental attitude, your spiritual beliefs. Those are the most important things about being prepared. That's it for today. You all be safe out there. Buy lots of ammunition. For those of you in occupied territory, the code words for today is change spark plug number 5. Change spark plug number 5. Be safe and God bless America.